Today, we're going to be editing some street photography. Well, not even just some street photography, just one street photo. However, I want to walk you through absolutely everything. I want to walk you through the photo when it's raw. I want to show you what I'm looking for. I want to show you what I kind of envision, how I envision it, what I really want to pull out of this photo. And then I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to do it inside of Lightroom Classic. So without further ado, let's dive into Lightroom Classic. Let's get this video started. All right, so here we are inside of Lightroom Classic. We've got our shot here, and there are a few things that I want to run through real quick. First of all, I really like the light in this shot, so I want to emphasize that as much as possible. We've got this gorgeous afternoon light hitting the entire city, and while it seems to be just complete blue skies, it doesn't seem incredibly harsh. There are shadows, but there aren't like harsh highlights in this image, which is probably one of the things I love so much about it. And what I mean by harsh highlights, there aren't just like clear lines that are distinguishing extremely bright and extremely dark. So I'm a real big fan of this light, and I really want to lean into that. The other thing as well, as you can see, like there's a giant city behind our subject right here, which is also out of focus. So I sort of want to isolate her in the bottom right-hand corner of the image and make her not stand out as much as the city. It kind of gives a little bit more of a lonely city feeling, especially because she is out of focus and the city is in focus as well. I think it's quite a powerful photo, so I really want to lean into that as well. And then last but not least, since this is sort of giving off a little bit more of a lonelier feeling, I want to make this photo a lot more dramatic too. So we've got a handful of things we're going to do. We're definitely going to be diving into the masking tool quite a lot, but without further ado, let's get this photo edited. All right, so first things first, let's correct our exposure. Things are a little bit too bright for my liking, even though we want to accentuate and really make that light stand out. We're going to drop the exposure just a touch, and we're also going to increase the contrast a little bit too. Definitely makes the city in the background stand out a lot. With that being said though, we're probably going to look at leaning on increasing the highlights here, decreasing the shadows just to add a little bit more contrast into our shot, and then we'll leave the blacks and whites as is. I don't think this image was taken 100% straight either, so just straightening that up a little bit makes this edit a bit nicer. And then we are also going to lean into warming this image up a touch as well. I want to make that city behind our subject a little bit bluer. I want to make the city feel a little bit colder. But for now, overall, I want a warmer tone on our shot. Now, something I do in all of my edits is decreasing the clarity, not too much, and then also decreasing the texture. This makes my highlights feel a little bit softer, makes everything feel a little softer, but especially the highlights, and that's kind of what I'm aiming to do here. So just having a little bit more of a nicer highlight roll off by decreasing the clarity is a really nice effect that I love leaning into. And that's pretty much all the basic tab is going to give us. Moving on into the curves tab here, let's place 3 points on our curve. Let's drop our shadows point. Let's increase our midtones point just a little bit. You can see that controls so much of our shot, just a little bit. Increase our highlight point as well. And then I'm also going to raise our blacks. That's going to fade out some of the darker parts of our shot. And then I want to do the opposite, the same thing, but to the highlights. And that's going to fade out the highlights. So I'm going to drag this down just a touch as well. And just from the tone curve, a quick before and after, just kind of breathes a lot more light, a lot more life into our shot, which is something that I'm a huge fan of. So with that out of the way, we're kind of breezing through things. Let's dive into the color mix tab here. The first thing I'm always looking to do is kill off most of the greens. Luckily in this shot, we've really only got green over here by the ferry terminal, but I want to look at killing a lot of those greens off. I really only want there to be two main colors in this shot, orange and blue. And yes, they are extremely complementary colors. And yes, the orange and teal look is everywhere, but it just happens to be this blue city behind our subject, and then all the warmth here kind of hitting this railing and pathway in the foreground. So that just happens to be the colors that are already in our shot, so we're gonna lean into them. So like I was saying, we're gonna decrease the saturation on the green slider right here. Let's have a look at what the yellows are controlling. We might look at decreasing the saturation on the yellows, but then also turning the yellows a little bit warmer as well to lean into that orange side of things. And then we're gonna look at increasing the orange just a touch. I really like this red boat here as well. I feel like there are kind of three subjects in this shot. We've got our out of focus person, we've got this red ferry right here, and then I say the city, but it's definitely this tower right here. Either way, we'll call it the city. So we've got our subject, the ferry, and the city. And I kind of want to make this ferry stand out a little bit more as well. Now we could definitely do this with masking, but looking at this shot, there aren't too many other red things apart from this AIA and whatever this is. So I might look at increasing the saturation on the reds a touch, a little before and after, just to make sure we're going in the right direction. And things are looking pretty nice like this. Now moving into the blues in our color mix tab. I think making the blues a little bit more teal, but making the aquas a little bit more blue is probably our way forward, just to kind of balance that out a little bit. I do like a more tealish blue instead of a purplish blue. So moving this slider obviously over to the left all the way definitely isn't the vibe, but moving it over just a little bit to the left, taking it away from the purples is quite nice. I'm going to increase the saturation of the blues as well, and also the saturation of the aquas, and then look at killing off the purples and killing off the magentas. So a quick before and after, things are definitely moving in the right direction. Our colors are starting to look quite nice, but I'm definitely keen to get into our masking workflow. All right, with that all out of the way, let's quickly dive into our luminance sliders. This is controlling the brightness or the darkness of a color. So if we darken the blue luminance, as you can see, the city gets a lot darker, but I don't want to do that too much. We're going to back off the luminance just a little bit on the blues, maybe the yellow, maybe the oranges as well, but I kind of like the way the path is lighting up. We'll leave those for now. Definitely the luminance on the reds, just a touch, probably going to affect this very nicely. Things are looking good. And then with that out of the way, that is our color mix workflow done. All right, moving into color grading now. Looking at this shot, we definitely want a little bit of warmth in our highlight. Oh, definitely, maybe we want blues in our highlights actually. If we look at pushing this a little too far, yeah, maybe we're looking at blues in the highlights to cool those off a little bit. And it seems like, especially in this shot, we've kind of got a warmer tone in our shadows. Usually blues sit in the shadows. So if we put blue into the shadows, it just makes things way too blue. But if we put a warmer tone into the shadows, things look a lot nicer. I definitely like this color grading setup a lot more than blues in the shadows. So we're backing these off. We're hardly adding any color into there. It's really just kind of like a nudge in the right direction. So if we turn that off and back on, you can see more or less nothing has changed. It's really just subtle changes here. And then I'm just gonna add a little bit of warmth into the midtones, but slider's getting a little bit finicky to play with. So if we open up just the mid-tone circle here, we can just dial back this saturation a touch and then make our way over to the shadows as well and look at increasing that just a little bit too. And then just turning off the color grading and back on. Things are a little bit warmer, but the highlights have stayed nice and cool, but not too cool. All right, so with that out of the way, the color grading is wrapped up. I don't know why I closed that. Into the detail here, I'm gonna back off all the sharpening. Do not want any sharpening on my shot whatsoever. Don't need to denoise anything. This was shot at 100 ISO, so things are looking great. We could probably enable profile corrections and chromatic aberration. It's kind of just like good housekeeping. The profile corrections keep if your lens is inside a profile correction already on Lightroom. So as you can see here, we shot this with the 50mm f1.4 G Master from Sony. It'll kind of counteract any warping you had going on from your lens, and then turning on chromatic aberration as well. Any like harsh highlight and dark parts of your shot sometimes can create weird coloring. So removing chromatic aberrations just helps to kind of negate that just a little bit. All right, with that out of the way, moving on from the transform tool, don't need to adjust that whatsoever. Lens blur, don't want to put any in this shot. Vignetting, we're going to do in our masking. And now we move into the camera calibration sliders. I did a full video breakdown on this tool a couple of years back. And today we're going to use it exactly the same way as I broke it down a couple of years back. And that is purely by sliding things left and sliding things right and leaning to the side that we want to go with. So instantly sliding this a little bit more to the left makes my image kind of feel a little bit more balanced. So we're going to put our shadows more over to the green side, moving into the red primary, left and right, definitely moving this over to the left. Saturation, maybe keeping this around neutral, but slightly increased. Green primary, we're gonna do the same thing here, moving it over to the right. Saturation of this, maybe just a little bit more as well. And then blue primary, definitely over to the left. And we'll also do the saturation as well. We'll increase this just a touch. And there we go, that is our base edit. So from this to this, I have a feeling the city stands out a little bit more. Definitely the ferry in the left stands out a little bit more, and our subject gets a little bit more lost in our shot, which is kind of exactly what I wanted to do. But with that being said, we're like 30% of the way there, because now all the fun starts inside of our masking workflow. So let's open up the masking tab right here. The first thing I'm going to do is put a big gradient filter just like this over our shot, rotate it to match the direction of our light, and then move it over to where our light is coming from. Now, there is one thing I want to do before I possibly change up this mask, and that is just increasing the exposure to see what things look like. I was leaning towards possibly masking out this building and this mountain ridge here, so it would have included all of these buildings to kind of give the illusion that the light is coming in from behind that. But I actually don't mind the way this looks when it's just covering absolutely everything. We can also come down here to the effects tab. So we still have our original radial filter selected, but we're going to decrease the clarity, and then we're also going to decrease the dehaze a little bit as well. Just kind of sells a little bit more light coming into our shot. So with that one out of the way, we can now open up, create a new mask. We're gonna hit radial gradient again, put another one over our shot like this, but this time we're going to scroll up to the top, hit invert, and then start to drop the exposure a little bit. Now what that's doing is just kind of cleaning up the corners of our image a touch. One thing I do want to make sure though is I'm going to intersect this mask with a brush, and we're going to see how accurately I can mask out the other mask we just put on our shot. Because if I increase the exposure coming from the top right hand corner to emphasize where that light is coming from, I don't want to then put another mask on top of it and decrease the exposure. It's kind of defeating the purpose, right? So if I come in here, make sure auto mask is off, our feather is huge, our brush is huge, and we're just going to come in here. Oh, I've got it around the wrong way. I want to intersect this mask with a brush and then hit invert. And now we are good to go. Huge brush. All right. And we're just going to paint this out just like that. Hit O, make sure things are looking good, which they are. Very happy with how this shot is starting to turn out. Now, another thing I want to do is kind of add a little bit more of a dramatic feel in the bottom right-hand corner of the shot where our subject is. This is going to draw a little bit more attention to our subject, but also clean up the bottom part of our image. And that's purely just by putting a linear gradient on our shot and then decreasing the exposure. Makes it feel like there's a shadow there, makes it feel like we were maybe a little bit closer to the ground. But either way, just decreasing that quite significantly, we can turn that off and back on. Absolutely changes everything in this shot. Now, moving back over to our ferry right here, let's just put a little radial gradient over the ferry. Then we're going to intersect this with a color range. I'm going to zoom into the ferry right here, select the reds. Everything else should be deselected, which it has been. I'm going to hit O to hide our mask overlay. And then I just want to increase the saturation on the ferry a touch, and then also increase the exposure on the ferry as well. I kind of want to make it stand out a little bit more than it is standing out already. And then I would say we're getting pretty close to wrapping up this edit. A little before and after. Maybe the city is a touch too blue, so I can come down here and hit the blue slider, back that off just a touch, possibly even come over to this side right here, and then look at increasing the dehaze just to kind of take a little bit of haziness out of that sky up in the top corner. Something I've also just noticed is this bird flying through our shot. I usually love birds in my photos, but this is just a little bit too close to the top of the frame. So what I'm going to do is open up our eraser tool, let that load for just a minute. There we go. Lightroom's just done a huge new update. Hit next. Okay, got it. We're going to deselect use generative AI just because I don't need to wait for Lightroom to do this. It should just be able to stamp right next to where the bird is. Just like that, it's nailed it. That really wasn't a hard stamp. Things are definitely starting to look pretty tasty. I'm just gonna clean up the rest of this shot with a couple of masks to kind of really help direct the viewer's eyes and direct the light coming into the image as well. So just putting a few extra masks to darken certain parts of our shot. Just like this, really emphasizing that dark ground in front of our subject. I also might want to just slightly increase the shadows on our subject as well. It can be a super rough mask because it's really not going to affect much else around our subject. A little before and after. I would say maybe the blues are leaning a little bit too much towards the aqua side, so we're going to clean those up ever so slightly, and then I would say things are looking pretty good. All right, so I'd pretty much say our edit is more or less done. We've kind of made this image exactly how I wanted to make it when we first opened it up at the beginning of this video, but the last thing I want to do is probably adjust the exposure value just a little bit. Even looking at the histogram up here, things are very, very bright in this shot, and I might have pushed it just a little bit too far. So to bring that back and to kind of bring a little bit more detail back into the city, because that is what is sharp, I'm just going to dial this back ever so slightly, maybe like minus 0.3 or minus 0.3, I should say, is looking pretty good. And I'm super happy with this shot. Usually, I'm not finding myself taking a load of street photos at this time of day. I like shooting at golden hour. I like shooting at blue hour. I like shooting at night, you name it. But when the light is a little bit more harsh, challenging yourself to shoot in other lighting conditions, I find is always pretty important. But anyway, guys, that is gonna wrap up today's video. A little bit of a before and after of the photo we just shot. You can see here a little before and a little after. Just like that, we've taken that photo from raw to edited in, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes or so. Very happy with the outcome of this video, but that's gonna wrap up today's video. If you're new around here, a subscribe would mean the absolute world. If you learned anything, I'd love to know what it was down in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.